Tene ta chungta tela cherdo tanda.
Now, in terms of the philosophical schools, there are the Buddhist schools and the non-Buddhist schools. And so of these two, we're talking about the non-Buddhist schools at the moment. And so here in this text, there are primarily 5 different non-Buddhist schools that are presented. They are presented like this, but actually you can sort of condense them all into 2 different types of schools. You have the eternalist schools and you have the nihilist schools. And so this morning, what was it that we talked about? This morning we talked about those nihilists. We talked about the Charvakas. The Charvaka school is a school that says that there is no reincarnation, there are no previous lives, no future lives, and so forth. And so we explained this position a little bit this morning. But when we talk about philosophical schools like this, we need to actually wonder, well, what is the reason for explaining this? What's the reason for knowing this? Because they all have many different positions. They make different assertions, and when we look at all those assertions, we have to realize that it's not that they're all completely wrong. It's not that at all. Actually, we have to recognize that in their assertions there are some qualities, and so we have to recognize those qualities for being where they are. So in terms of recognizing and knowing that there are qualities where there are qualities, that is why we have to understand them. And then when we come to understand our own particular Buddhist philosophy, our particular Buddhist view, then we can say, this is a feature of this. And it's not like that. This is different from how we Buddhists present it. And so that's what that's why it is. We can understand this and know that. And so that is why we learn what it is that the non-Buddhist schools present and the outsider non-Buddhist schools present. And so we talked about the Charvakas this morning, and so now we'll move on to the other 4 non-Buddhist schools, which are the Samkhya or enumerators, the Vaisheshika or the particularists, the Dagamba naked ascetics, and the Mimamsaka, the analyzers. And so of these 4, the first of these is the Samkhya school. And the history of the Samkhya school is that when it first spread, it was founded by a person from Kapila, the city of Kapila. And so he went into the mountains to meditate. And when he was meditating there, he had some sort of realization. And through that sort of realization that he had, he said, this is probably what things are like. This is how it probably is. And so he said, and from that realization, he then founded the Samkhya or the Kapila Samkhya school. And so that was founded by a teacher from Kapila. That is the Samkhya school. The second school is the Vaisheshika, or the particularist school. And so this is a school that posits that there is a God, that there is a Lord named Ishvara in Sanskrit, or you could just say God or the Lord. So they assert that there is a God, and they have a lot of faith. And so they're in this God. Now, the founder of this school one day went to go meditating, and he was meditating at a shrine of this god Ishvara. And when he was meditating there was an owl that came and landed on the shrine. And he thought to himself, this must be an emanation of the god Ishvara. Because every time he would think of a question and ask a question, the owl would bob its head. And so the owl bobbed his head, and he asked 6 different questions, and the owl bobbed his head 6 times, and then after that flew away. So these must be these 6 assertions, these 6 proper questions. In that way, these are the 6 basic assertions of the particularist Vaisheshika school. And so sometimes they're called the particularists or the Vaisheshikas. Sometimes they're called the school of Ishvara. And sometimes they're just called how shall I translate this? The owl school, we could say, because their teacher or their founder had such a good rapport with that owl. So the Vaisheshika school, the particularist school, says that there are 6 different types of knowable things, 6 different bases of the knowable things. And so that is their main proposition. So before that, we also talked about the Samkhya, the enumerator school. And so for the Samkhya school, they say that that all of the different things that we know can be categorized in 25 different categories. And so everything can be enumerated or categorized in that. And of these, there is one that they call the principle, or in Sanskrit, it's called the prakriti. This prime or prakriti is like, it takes the form of the objects, and so they say that this is permanent and that it is material. And so they say that it also is what creates the world, that all the world comes out of this prime, this prakriti. Then they say that there is a self or a soul, and it's the self that sort of enjoys that everything that's created. It enjoys what the prakriti creates. And because of that, it ends up wandering through samsara. But later, when it comes to realize the nature of things, when it realizes the nature of what this prime, what the prakriti is, then it can be liberated from samsara. Now, Mipam Rinpoche, in his commentary on the ornament of the Middle Way, said of this view that actually this view is the best of all the non-Buddhist views. And the reason that it is the best of the non-Buddhist views is that it's something that came out of meditation. The teacher of this view developed it out of his meditation. And when he was talking about the prakriti, or the primary substance, the primal substance, it was like he caught a glimpse of the all-ground consciousness. And when he caught a glimpse of this, he thought, that must be this primary substance. That must be this prakriti. And he thought that it was material because when you actually, the all-ground consciousness is actually a very unclear sort of consciousness. So he just mistook it for being something material. And so, in this way, Mipam Rinpoche actually praised this as being a good, the best of the non-Buddhist of non-Buddhist philosophies. The next of the philosophies is the Mimamsaka school. So the Mimamsaka school is actually a sub-school of the Vaivashika. So the Mimamsaka, or analyzers, are a subset of the Vaisheshika or particularist schools. So there's a subset of that. But what the difference is between the two, so like the Vaisheshika, they assert that there is the god Ishvara and the god Brahma. These two are the creators of the universe and so forth. But what is particular to their view is they say that if you die in battle, you will not fall to hell, you will get to go to heaven. The reason that they make this assertion is that there was a king who was having trouble recruiting and conscripting people for his army. And so you say, you can go to heaven if you go to battle, then that's a good thing for the king, sort of. So that is the Mimamsaka school. And so that is the third of the fourth. And the fourth is what's called here the naked ascetics, or the Digamba school. This is also known as the Jain philosophy. This is a philosophy that developed at the same time as the Buddha, and they also called their teacher the victor, or the Jinnah, which is why they're called the Jain school. And in their assertions, they hold that karma, cause, and effect are extremely important. So they are very, very careful about their conduct, and so they have very good, pure conduct. And so they developed their school out of this.
Tene ta tenzuga tawa kanga kare segi yori sena zo de gitin je komde ta shepa bu.
So what is it that all these schools, what are all of their views? Well, their view is that there is a creator who made the world, who created and made the world. And they also say that there is a self, that there is a soul, or that there is a self. And that this is a thing. It's something that truly exists. So in the Buddhist view, we say there's no self. In the non-Buddhist view, they say that there is a self, there is a soul, and that this exists. And so because of this, because of these distinctions and the distinctions within their own views, there came the different philosophical schools. Now, all four of these philosophical schools are what we call eternalists. They say that things are permanent. And so these spread in ancient India. And when they spread in ancient India, and then we also had the Buddhist teachings that spread, and there were some differences in the views. It's important to clearly explain the differences between the views. At the time that Buddhism spread in India, there were the great monastic universities at Nalanda and at Vikramashila. And when the teachings spread there were many great scholars and pundits who said there, okay, these are the assertions of the non-Buddhist schools, these are the assertions of the Buddhists, and you have to distinguish between, and so they distinguished carefully between and clearly between these two. And so these are basically the views, in a nutshell, of the non-Buddhist views. Now, when the Dalai Lama was teaching on a text called the Golden Garland of the Philosophical Schools, or in Tibetan, the Drupta Rinchen Trangwa, the Golden Garland of the Philosophical Schools, in this, he sort of added on to this, filled it in, because those were the Indian schools, but nowadays there are also, of course, the Christian and the Muslim and many other great religions. And these are religions that assert that there is a God who created the world, and they assert that there is a soul and so forth. They say there is a soul or a self that truly exists. They say there is a God who created the world. And so they present their own philosophies, their own views, and they present these. And so they do say that there is a creator, they do say that there is a soul, but each of these also has their own particular special features. And there are also wonderful ways, if you practice them, to develop loving kindness, to develop compassion, to develop true altruism and the wish to help others. And so these, and there are many people who hold these views, who really go through a lot of effort and a lot of difficulty to help other beings. And so really, and there have been many great beings who have appeared out of all of these schools. And so it's important for us to really recognize this and to say that, to recognize what is good and to give them credit for what they are. So just because they're not Buddhist does not mean in any respect that we should not have any faith in them and that we should not respect them. It does not mean that at all. Rather, we should have faith in them and we should respect them for what they are. But at the same time, we need to understand what the distinctions between the Buddhist view and the non-Buddhist views are. And so these religions say that there is a creator, a God who created the world. And so is this something that fits with our Buddhist view? Well, it isn't. It doesn't fit with our Buddhist view, but still, if you assert that there is a creator, actually this can be pretty good. This can be a view that can really help you to bring you to help other people. It can be very good and actually lead you to do things that do fit with Dharma. So I actually have not really had many opportunities to have any really in-depth dialogue with someone who's really educated and knows these religions and these philosophies well. But in Varanasi, where I have a monastery, there is a silk merchant who is Muslim. And he sometimes comes over, and when he comes over, we have discussions and we talk about things. And he says things like, you can't tell lies. You can't tell lies, because if you tell a lie, you might fool that other person that you're talking to, but you aren't going to fool Allah. And since you won't fool Allah, He's not going to know what you're going to do. So it's important for you to be mindful, to always be straightforward and honest, to always behave well. And to have love and compassion, to have that good motivation. It's important because Allah knows what is going on in whatever you're doing. So whatever you do, you need to do things that really fit with the will of Allah, that fit with Allah's mind. And so you have to do that. So that it comes out that he ends up having a very good motivation. So he has a very good motivation. Is his view, does it fit with the Buddhist view? It doesn't fit. But is it bad? It certainly isn't bad. In his teaching on the Golden Garland of the philosophical schools, the Dalai Lama gave some really good advice. And he said that we need to know all these religions. We need to know what they are. And when we know them, we should not have any misconceptions or think they're bad and be disrespectful of them. We need to respect them. All of the different religions have their own particular views, and all of these views can be the root that lead people to treat each other well, to have love and kindness. All of these religions can be straightforward, honest, good, and helpful. They're the root for developing love and compassion. And so we have to understand them, we need to know them, we have to realize that they're all good. But that does not necessarily mean that we have to practice all of the different views. We actually need to practice our own path and practice that well. And so, listening to that, I thought this is really good advice. And so I wanted to pass that on to all of you. So we need to have that sort of a motivation. So that was the description of the non-Buddhist schools. And following that comes the description of the Buddhist schools. And so among the Buddhist schools, there are generally two different primary divisions, the two main different vehicles. The Sutra vehicle, which takes the cause as the path, and the Secret Mantra Vajrayana, which takes fruition as the path. And so the Sutra vehicle, which takes the cause as the path. When we say that taking the cause as the path, this means the cause of practicing virtue, of giving up misdeeds and non-virtue, doing meditation and gathering the accumulations. And so it's practicing just these. So that is primarily the view of the sutras. So this is the view of the sutra schools, which take the cause as the path. And then the second type is the Secret Mantra Vajrayana, which takes the result as the path. And so in terms of taking the result as the path, it's like thinking to ourselves, we want to attain the good result. And the embodiment of that result is the Yidam deity. The Yidam deity who appears in the form of the Sambhogakaya, or enjoyment body of the Buddha, or appears in the form of the Dharmakaya of the Buddha, or in the form of the Nirmanakaya, or emanation body of the Buddha. And so this is the resultant body of the Yidam deity. So we meditate upon our own body as being this body that is the result of the meditation. We recite mantras, and we use many different other methods. So these are the practices of the Secret Mantra Vajrayana, the second of the two general categories of Buddhist schools. And so of these two different categories, the first of these is the Sutra school, which takes cause as the path. And among this Sutra school that takes cause as the path, there are four basic schools. So what are these four different Buddhist schools? Well, the four different Buddhist schools are first in the foundation vehicle of what's sometimes the Shravakas, the listeners or the disciples, which are the Great Exposition or Vaibhashika school, and the Sutra school, or in Sanskrit, Sautrantika school. And then among the Mahayana schools, there are the mind only, or Chittamatra, and the middle way, or Madhyamaka school. So these are the four different schools. And so of these four different schools, well, what is the reason that there happen to be four different schools? Well, the reason is that when the Buddha appeared on the earth and taught the Dharma was brand new. So the Dharma was brand spanking new, and if you tell the most profound and the most difficult and the vast and the greatest view of the Buddha, of the Dharma at that time, no one's going to understand it. And they're going to say, "What's this? That can't be. There's no way. I don't believe that." And then they'd never enter Buddhism and never follow. There wouldn't be any Buddhist followers in any way. And so for that reason, when the Buddha taught the Dharma, he taught two different types of sutras. He taught the sutras of what is called the guiding meaning, which is sometimes also translated as the expedient meaning, the guiding meaning, and also the definitive meaning. So you have the guiding meaning and the definitive meaning. And of these two, the first that he taught is the guiding meaning. And so the guiding meaning is that first you have to guide people and guide them gradually down the path to the point where they'll be able to understand and realize the actual the actual meanings. And so first you guide them with that, and you tell things that may not be exactly how things actually are, but by telling them that way, then gradually you come to the point where you can realize the way things actually are. So that is the guiding meaning. And then the second meaning is the definitive meaning. And so this is the main thing that we actually need to meditate upon. The main things that we actually need to practice. That is what is taught in the sutras of the definitive meaning. But if you just teach those right away, people aren't going to understand them. So first you teach the guiding meaning, and then that brings you to the a place where you can understand the ultimate definitive meaning. And so that's how it was at the time of the Buddha. And so you might wonder, well, now it's been a long time ago. That was a long time ago. Can we just skip right to the ultimate meaning right now? Well, actually, it's still kind of useful to have that guiding meaning, because when people meet the Dharma for the first time, they gradually need to work into it. Some things, such powerful logic, such difficult, hard things to understand, that you first actually need to know a little bit. And so after you know a little bit, then gradually you can come to the point where you can get to the real meat of it. So first you have the views of the listener vehicles of the Great Exposition or Vaibhashika, and the Sutra school or Sautrantika school. And because these are schools that it is easy to believe in, it is easy to have faith and devotion in them, and then gradually you can then begin to learn the views of the mind-only and the middle way schools, the views of the Mahayana path. They'll be, at that point, the Mahayana path will be much easier to understand, and so. That is why the Buddha taught these 4 different philosophical schools. It's taught as sort of a progression. It's like, for instance, to give an analogy, if you have a baby, you can't give them adult food right away. First you have to give the baby food. And then once they're used to eating and have some teeth, then you can give them adult food. And so in the same way with beginners, then first you start out with a guiding meaning. And then when you have a foundation in that guiding meaning, then gradually you can add the ultimate meaning. And then it's very beneficial. It becomes easier to realize what's happening, easy to know what's happening, easy to have real certainty in the teachings. So, actually, this is my own experience when I was little. So when I was little and I was first studying philosophy and texts, I really hadn't, up to that point, I hadn't heard anyone say anything about lack of a self, selflessness, emptiness, or anything like that. I didn't know anything about that. And so we were first studying, and the first text we studied was The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. And in studying this, in the beginning of it, there wasn't anything really surprising. It talks about the benefits of bodhicitta, how to make offerings, how to confess misdeeds, and so forth. There wasn't anything really amazing or outstanding in it. And then we got to the 9th chapter, the wisdom chapter, and we got there and it said, there's no self in it. Wait a minute. That can't be. There is a self. There's got to be a self. How can there be no self? It's like, how can that be? It's like, but then gradually sort of thinking about how it is and getting a little bit of an understanding, thinking about the logics and the reason, I thought, well, maybe there isn't a self. Okay, maybe there's no self. I can sort of get that. Now, this would not qualify as, the wisdom that realizes emptiness by any stretch, but it was sort of an understanding that, okay, probably there's no self. So I was able to develop that sort of understanding of that. Then the next text that we studied was The Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu. And what is the main thing that this teaches? Well, the main thing that this teaches is that all phenomena are made up of partless units. They're made up of indivisible particles and of finite, the infinitesimally small, short moments of time. And everything's made up of these particles, or of these units. And this is something that really fit. I could really get this one, and I thought to myself, yeah, this is how it is. Everything is made up of particles. There are these real instants of time. This really makes a lot of sense, and so it's like everything really made a lot of sense there. But to say everything's emptiness? Nah, that can't be. There's no way you could say everything's emptiness. I even was so bold as to one day say to my Khenpo, I don't accept that there is emptiness. and so, this is why it is for beginners. For the beginners, it's difficult to understand for beginners. And because it's difficult to understand, you have to go gradually. And so gradually then you can get to the middle way. And so we got to the middle way, and it was like, then once we actually studied the middle way, then I was able to say, oh yeah, everything is emptiness. And so for that reason, when the Buddha taught the Dharma, the Buddha taught the 3 different wheels of Dharma. He turned the wheel of Dharma 3 times. And so the first time that he turned the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha had just awakened to Buddhahood at the Vajra seed in Bodh Gaya. And when he awakened there, at that time, of course, there were there are the teachings of the sutras of the definitive meaning and the guiding meaning and so forth, and special teachings. But here, in terms of the general, well-known framework of it, when the Buddha awakened to complete and perfect awakening, he thought to himself, wow, this Dharma that I've realized is really deep and peaceful. Deep, peaceful, unelaborate, luminous, non-compound. Like nectar it is this Dharma I've found. Whomever I teach it shall not understand it, and so without speaking I'll stay in this wood, he said. And so this is really peaceful, really profound Dharma. And it's like a nectar. It's something that can be really helpful to all of it. But people just aren't going to understand it. Whoever I teach it to is not going to understand it. And so it's better for me not to teach. I'm just going to go off in the wood and stay in solitude and meditate like this. And so he spent 7 weeks in solitude, not teaching the Dharma. But then the gods came down, they supplicated him to turn the wheel of the Dharma, and he did then turn the wheel of the Dharma. And when he turned the wheel of the Dharma, what is it that he taught? Well, he taught the 4 noble truths, the truths of suffering, the truth of cessation, the truth of suffering, the truth of origin, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. He taught the wheel of the 4 noble truths. And when he turned this Dharma wheel, or taught the Dharma, then what he taught is that everything that we see in this world, everything that we see is by its very nature. It's the 5 aggregates. We have these 5 aggregates. And so when we talk about an aggregate, we say that everything is by nature an aggregate, then there are all these things that appear to us. And the way that we normally perceive things, the way it appears to us, it's like, actually there is something real there. There's something solid, real that we can fix onto it. There's something that we can experience desire or aversion or delusion towards. There is a real object, and that object is solid. There's something actually there. Looks like there are things outside, and then there's our body. Our body is real. There's something real about our body, and solid, a sort of singular thing about our body. And we feel like there is something for us to be attached to there. But actually, if we look at the nature of our body, we see it's just an aggregate. It's a conglomeration of everything brought together. So we say with our body, like it's the aggregate of form. So it's the aggregate of form. If we gradually look at, we see that all of the external things, they're just various things that are all put together, all the external mountains, fences, houses, rivers, and so forth. And then our own internal bodies, there are just many different things put together, many atoms that are all collected together. They're all collected together, but they're all ready to just fall apart at any time as well. So that is the aggregate of form. And so it's just many different things that are aggregated together. So this first is realizing that so everything first comes together, and then later it's all going to fall apart. And so it's similar with our mind. Our mind is, we think that our mind is this solid thing, but actually there are different types of things. There's feelings, formations, conceptions, and consciousness. So we have the four different aggregates in the mind of feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. And so it's just many different things that are put together. There's no single thing, there's no real essence, no solid thing that is our mind. And so that is the truth of suffering. The five aggregates are this truth of suffering. And so we want to get rid of the suffering. And if we think to ourselves, I don't need that anymore, I'm not going to do that, I'm just not going to go there. World, you go away. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. Is that going to work? It's not going to work. The world is happening today. It's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen the day after that as well. If we just say, I give up, it's not going to happen anymore, I don't want it, that isn't going to stop it. We aren't going to be able to stop our suffering. But if we look at it, then we see actually there is a root that all of this suffering comes from. And because there's a root, we have a root that it comes from. There's something we can do. There's a method we can do. We have to realize what the cause of it, and the cause of the suffering, the origin of this is karma and afflictions. And of these two, the primary one that it is the afflictions. It is the afflictions of greed, aversion, delusion, pride, and all of the other fictions. It's all the fixations, all the clinging and attachments, the great clinging and attachment that we have. And we need to, if we can get rid of those, we can get rid of our suffering. But when we want to get rid of these, if we just say, okay, I don't ever need to be greedy anymore, I don't ever need to get angry or feel hatred or aversion, I can just get rid of them. Is this going to get rid of them? It's not going to get rid of them. So we need to look for a way to get rid of them. And is there actually something that we can look for? Is there a method we can look for? There is a method that we can look for. And the reason is because our greed, our aversion, and our delusion, our pride, all of our afflictions have a cause. And that cause is clinging to a self, fixation on a self. We cling to the idea that I am me, there's a self there. We cling to that. We think that we want to be happy. We want to have all of the happiness. We want to always have happiness, and we want it to have every single happiness for ourselves. Our wish for happiness can never be satisfied. There's no end to it. And we want to get rid of every single shred of suffering. We want to get rid of all of our suffering. We want to cleanse it all, just get rid of it, scrub it all away. And so we have this great clinging to this idea of getting rid of all the suffering. And what this is called cherishing ourselves. So we have this self-cherishing. And so if we have this self-cherishing, then we want to be able to get rid of that. And we can get rid of that, because if we can get rid of the cause of that, then we will be able to do that. Realize, there isn't really a self there. Then we can get rid of the cause. Because when we are fixated on a self, when we grasp at a self, if there were something that we could actually grasp onto, then there'd be no way that we would be able to get rid of that grasping. But because there's nothing actually to grasp onto, then if we realize that there's nothing to grasp onto, then that grasping naturally then goes away. And so we then can meditate upon the selflessness of the individual. And that is the path. The truth of the path is meditating upon selflessness. And through meditating upon this selflessness, then we will gradually come to the results of giving up the afflictions one by one, and we will come to the truth of cessation. And so in this way we have these four noble truths. And so in teaching this and turning the wheel of Dharma of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha primarily taught that everything is made up of aggregates. And so the Buddha first taught this, and then when he taught this, his students listened to it, and then gradually this started a lineage, the teachings, a succession of the teachings. He taught it, and there were the 7 elders of the teachings. First the Buddha taught it, and then his great students, first the great Kashyapa, and then after Kashyapa passed away, there was Ananda, and then gradually there were 7 other great elders who preserved the teachings for many generations, and they primarily taught these teachings of the Four Noble Truths. And so when they taught these teachings of the Four Noble Truths, first the teacher would teach, and then through through listening and contemplating them, and developing an understanding. So a spiritual friend or a teacher would teach these to students, they'd instruct the students in them, and then first the students would develop an understanding, they'd study, they'd contemplate, and then they would be able to practice them through meditation. And as they practiced them through meditation, they would gradually come to the ultimate results of their meditation. And so this is how the teachings were passed down, how they're preserved and taught. And so primarily when we talk about these teachings, they're primarily passed down in terms of two different teachings. The Great Exposition School, which in Sanskrit is called the Vaibhashika School. So the Great Exposition or Vaibhashika School. And then the other school is called the Sutra School, which in Sanskrit is called the Sautrantika School. So the Sutra or Sautrantika School. So they're primarily passed down as these two different schools, the Great Exposition and the Sutra schools. And these views spread. What is the primary view of? What is the primary period of the teachings that they come out of? These come out of the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma, the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. And so when teaching this, well, what is actually the main practice that these schools do? Well, the main practice they do is to practice the Four Noble Truths. Now, when we talk about practice, of course, we have different things we can talk about. We can talk about view, meditation, and conduct, of course, but primarily when we talk about this in terms of the view, they talk about the view of the lack of an individual self, the selflessness of the individual. And so this is a method to subdue or to tame the afflictions or the kleshas that we have. So we have the afflictions of of greed, aversion, and delusion. And so generally, when we talk about things, when we talk about the different types of obscurations that we have, in general we talk about two different types of obscurations. There are the afflictive obscurations and there are the cognitive obscurations. So we have the afflictive and the cognitive obscurations. And of these two, these schools primarily work with the afflictive obscurations. They primarily do the practices of that deal with the afflictive obscurations. So these are the practices of the Great Exposition and the Sutra schools. And in their view, as it says here, the Great Exposition and the Sutra schools of the foundation vehicle each has 7 particular propositions. So as it says here, they each have their own particular views and their own particular things, but in general, they share share certain propositions. They share the idea that whether we think about long periods of time or whether we think about coarse physical objects, that they're all made up of indivisible units. So in terms of long periods of time, like years or months or so forth, or in terms of coarse phenomena like big things, mountains or whatever sort of commons, all of these are just relative terms. These are all relative, they are sort of fictitious, they are not true, they are confusion. But what is the root that they're made out of? Well, they're made out of atoms that have no part in them. They're so partless atoms and instances that don't have any part. So like when you have particles, you can take something and you can divide it up into particles. You divide it and you keep going further and further down, dividing it into a smaller and smaller particle, until finally you come to a partless atom that you can't divide into any direction. You can't say that there's an east side or a south or a west or a north side. There's no way to distinguish any part. And so that is the partless atom, or the smallest possible particle. And then when you think about time, we have periods of time, like we have a year, months, days, yesterday, tomorrow, whatever. But all of these units of time, they can all be divided up into smaller and smaller units of time until you come to an instant of time that is so short that you can't say that it has any beginning or any end. There's no no way that it relates to any past or any future. There's no past or future in it at all. And so that is the smallest indivisible instant of time. So all of our experience, all of the coarse phenomena, all of the periods of time are made up of these indivisible instants or indivisible atoms, and they are not true in any way. So generally when we think about the phenomena that we have, there are the external phenomena that we perceive, and there also is the internal perceiving mind. And of these two, what are the external phenomena that we perceive made up of? They're primarily made up of these partless atoms. So all of the external phenomena are made up of indivisible atoms. And then there our internal mind. If we look at our mind, actually, our mind comes in moments. And so the smallest possible unit of our mind is this indivisible instant of time. So in this way, our mind, we can see that everything comes together by all of these things put together. There's nothing true about them in any way. With our mind, there's nothing true about the longer periods of time. We think of there being years and yesterday and tomorrow and so forth, but actually there are just these indivisible instants of time that are all that we all put together and say are a year or a time. And so when we meditate upon this, we can come to understand the lack of an individual self. And then through doing that, then we'll stop our fixation on ourself. And the reason that this works is that normally when we think of ourselves as being like there's a single me. I'm permanent. There's me. I'm lasting. There's some sort of enduring sort of me. I was here yesterday. I'm going to be here tomorrow. And we think that like there was this me that was a child. There's a me that's an adult. There's a me that's going to become an old person. And it's all the same me, this sort of lasting, permanent sense of a me. But actually, when we look at that me, it's just a whole bunch of indivisible instants that go through time. It's all these particles that are put together. So we realize that actually it's just all these particles and that are assembled, that it's all of these indivisible instants of time. And if we realize that, then we'll naturally come to know that there is no self of an individual. And so that is the reason why the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School primarily have this same view of meditating upon the lack of an individual self. So realizing the selflessness of the individual is really important. Meditating upon the selflessness of the individual is very important. But not only that, it is also really helpful and beneficial to establish it through logic and reasoning, to understand it. It's very helpful to do this. So as we meditate upon the selflessness of the individual, we can see that when we meditate upon this, do we say that the atoms, the indivisible atoms in the indivisible instance of time are not established, that they're emptiness? We don't say that. We do not prove that. And the reason for doing that is that if you say there's nothing at all, then there's this danger that you might say, oh, then I don't have to do virtuous things. I don't have to give up doing bad things. There's no problem that comes out of misdeeds and wrongdoing. And so you might have this sort of wrong understanding, this misconception. And so if you have that, then you'll think that there's no virtue and there are no misdeeds, and then you will go down the wrong path. And so that you go down the right path, then it's taught that actually there are these partless particles, and that there are these indivisible entities, that they do truly exist. And so then we can, through meditating upon this, we can come to understand that there is the selflessness of the individual. When we realize the selflessness of the individual, then we are able to give up the afflictive obscurations. And through doing that, then we progress down the path and we come down to the result. Now, generally, when we talk about the And so here, for this reason, these schools teach that there are the external particles, that they do truly exist. And this is why, as it says here, they assert the existence of external phenomena, and thus are known as the two externalist schools. They're called externalist schools because they say that there are the indivisible atoms that actually exist, that are outside. So they're called the externalist schools. And so they. So now, what is the? And so these are the two schools: the Sutra school and the Great Exposition school, that say that that are the externalist schools. Now, what is the quality? What are the good things about this? The good thing about this is that the root of wandering in samsara is the afflictions of greed, delusion, and greed, aversion, and delusion. And so when we realize that there's no self, then we can destroy these afflictions entirely and forever. And so when we do that, then we attain liberation. And by attaining liberation, then we no longer will need to be reborn in samsara, will no longer need to be reborn in the lower realms. And so that is really good. That is really wonderful. That is actually amazing that it can happen. But as it says here, these schools do not realize the lack of existence of phenomena, and thus do not achieve complete liberation. This is described in detail in the Ratnavali, Refuting Disputes, in the Wisdom chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattvas. So do these schools realize the emptiness of all phenomena? Well, okay, they don't realize the emptiness of all phenomena. They say that there are these partless particles, that there are atoms, that they say that there are these partless, indivisible instants that are truly exist. They have some fixation on that, and because of that, what is it that they can attain? Well, generally, in the Buddhist view, we say that there are two different types of result that we can attain. We can attain liberation, and we can attain omniscience. And so, if we just get rid of the afflictive obscurations, then we can come to the result of the arhat, of the listener or the Shravaka schools. And this is just merely freeing ourselves from all, merely freeing ourselves from all of the suffering of samsara. But it's not the same as the state of Buddhahood. Buddhahood is when we free ourselves of all of the afflictive obscurations and also of all of the cognitive obscurations. We've freed ourselves of all obscurations entirely, and so we've awakened ourselves to the true nature of everything that can be known. We've realized that. And because we've realized that, we develop the qualities of love, of wisdom, love, and power. We awaken to the state of Buddhahood, and that is what we call omniscience. And so when you just realize only the selflessness of the individual, then you can achieve the liberation of the listener schools, of the Great Exposition and the Sutra schools, but you are not really able to come to the actual omniscience of the state of Buddhahood. And so this is, as explained in detail in the Madhyamaka, which we will come to tomorrow, later on in the text. So why is it that they have not realized that they aren't able to realize the omniscience? It's because they have not been able to realize the selflessness of phenomena, and because they have not realized the selflessness of phenomena, they are not able to awaken to the state of Buddhahood. So that is enough for this afternoon. We have talked about the two schools, the listener schools of the Great Exposition and the Sutra school. Tomorrow we'll talk about the mind-only school.